You boys be quiet down there!
Welcome back to PC-88 Paradise, the series where we take a close look at classic games for the NEC PC-88, the most popular Japanese PC series of the 1980s. It's been almost half a year now since I made my video on Xak I for the PC-88, but Xak had an entire series of games, some which even had PC-88 versions. So I think it's about time I got around to the original PC-88 version of Xak II, Rising of the Red Moon, released in 1990. Fairly or not, in my Xak I video I referred to the game as an Ys clone. So when looking at Xak II today, the big question is, does Xak II do anything more to differentiate itself from the Ys series? Let's find out. The game comes in a clamshell case, a little bit larger than the first one. First, there's the user support card, which like the first game was used for sending the game back to Microcabin in the event of a defect. Next, there's sort of a clear illustration card or something. I don't know what this would be used for, but it's kind of cool, isn't it? I also have a fresh, unused user disc sticker. The manual is mostly in color and contains a few really cool illustrations regarding the story. Now, as you can see, this case has a rather unique method of holding the floppy disks in place. This clear plastic piece is printed in full color, with a cool rendition of the game's logo and another really cool illustration of the characters behind the disks. The game is contained on 7 floppy disks this time, which is quite a bit more than the first game's 4. To boot the game, we simply insert disk 1 and drive 1. We are taken to the Xak II demo boot menu. First of all, let's select the first option to create a user disk. Just like in the first game, we're asked to input a name for the protagonist, except now it's in katakana and the last name can't be changed from Cart. This time, to make things less confusing, let's just use the character's official name, Latok Cart. We're then asked to insert disk 3 in drive 1 and a blank disk in drive 2. Once you have a user disk, next time you can boot the game with just the user disk in drive 1 if you want to skip the opening. For now, let's go back to disk 1 and also add disk 2 so we can watch that opening. Back to the demo boot menu. You can select analog or digital display mode to start the game. Here you're definitely going to want to select analog mode, unless for some reason you have an old 8-color digital monitor because you think they're cool or whatever. I'm going to select analog mode and enjoy the PC-88's full 512 color palette. The opening of Xak II is over 8 minutes long, but can be summed up pretty simply. The world of Xak has been at peace since Latok defeated the demon Badu 3 years ago, but now an even bigger and badder demon named Gospel has emerged, along with a new type of monsters ravaging the land. The melody in the BGM is the same as the opening from Xak I, which was a track simply titled Xak. The inclusion of this melody at a few points in Xak II firmly establishes it as the main theme of the series. In Xak II, Latok travels to the town of Banua in search of his father, Dork.
Oh man, what a dork.
After the opening is finished, we're asked to insert our user disk in drive 1, and then disk 4 in drive 2. Latok is traveling along with the Pixie from the first game, which is weird since in my headcanon the Pixie is evil. They're lost in an enchanted forest, and the way to the town of Banua seems to be blocked by magic. Then they notice a girl tied to a tree nearby. This is Shauna, one of the main characters of Xak II.
Without us, sha-la-la-la.
You'd think she'd be tied here due to some important plot-related reason, but she says it was just some pesky goblins who live in the forest. Shauna is slightly injured and asks Latok to help her to town. She uses her magical statue to open the secret entrance. After helping her to the hospital, she eventually gives Latok an identical magical statue so that he can travel freely between the forest and the town. In town, we meet a number of important characters, including the doctor, the mayor, and the shop owners. They seem to have put more of an emphasis on the in-game character art than in the first one, which might be one of the reasons why this one needed more floppy disks. The pixel art and overall look of the graphics is one of my favorite aspects of Xak II. The weapon shop owner asks Latok to lend him all his current equipment and promises to forge them into something great. In the meantime, he'll give Latok a complete set of the weakest equipment he sells. I don't know, man, this doesn't sound like a good deal to me. Latok starts with some of the best equipment from the first game, but we need to agree to this in order to open up the weapons shop and progress the game, so I guess there's no choice. We won't get the reforged equipment back until just before the final dungeon. By the way, I really loved the shop music in Xak II. It's like they wanted to make something more weird sounding than the more orthodox shop music of the first game, and they really went all out and had fun with it. Let's try saving the game. F5 brings up the save menu and F1 loads. Space uses items. Escape pauses and F3 brings up the game speed menu. In Xak II, I prefer the 8 MHz mode. Like in Xak I, the no wait mode at the top just kind of lets the CPU rip at full speed and can be a bit inconsistent. Lastly, F2 brings up the main menu, which has been dramatically modernized compared to the first game, especially the equipment and item menus. The boss mode does just what it sounds like. It lets you fight the game's bosses again, but it only works after you've finished the game, so most of the time it's just sitting here taking up space. Pray Duel is a weird option. You can pray to the god Duel who will restore your HP and MP, but this can only be used once throughout your entire adventure. Well, that seems stupid. I racked my brain trying to figure out why they included this, and my best guess is that it's a final Hail Mary you can use when you've accidentally saved yourself into an impossible situation. Maybe there were a lot of players who said that they had that problem in the first game. I don't know, it's just a guess. But whatever the reason, this option is here staring at you in the main menu every time you open it, so try not to use it. The priest at the church gives Latok his first mission of the game. The enchanted forest where he found Shana has had an increase in monsters roaming lately, and he wants Latok to defeat them. Simple enough? The layout of Xak II consists of the hub town of Banua, surrounded by a large dungeon on each of the 4 sides. That's basically the entire game. It's a bit of a departure from the first game, which had 3 major towns and felt more like you had traveled somewhere by the end. But nonetheless, the hub town approach has been used in many great RPGs as well, and I really like the town of Banua and its BGM. So let's get to work ridding the forest of its monster problem. I really love the forest BGM too. It's more of an atmospheric track than a catchy melodic one, but I like the sound, and for me this is the tune I associate most with Xak II. The first and most obvious difference in Xak II is that Latok can now jump. This is thanks to the Xak VR system version 2.0. This update focuses on adding height to the 3D space of the playfield. It also allows for some parallax scrolling, but it looks pretty bumpy in the PC-88 version. You may have also noticed that Xak II is displayed in a frame in the middle of the screen, which is a bit of a letdown since I really liked how much of the screen Xak I used. But I guess some sacrifices had to be made in order to make improvements. One other update to the VR system is that you can now turn caps lock on if you want to see through the 3D objects and avoid surprise enemy attacks. By the way, you may have noticed that I sold my PC-88 keyboard and am now using a USB keyboard adapter from classicpc.org. I also have one for PC-98. One might say that something feels sort of lost when playing these old PCs without the old buckling spring clicky keyboards, but unfortunately I live in a small Tokyo apartment where space is always a concern, and being able to use the same keyboard for both my modern and vintage PCs at this desk is super convenient. Back to the game. In addition to the jump, the other trigger button on the controller swings your sword, so yes, the East-style bump attack system from the previous game is gone. So here are some of the highlights of the forest section of the game. Latok meets some lost travelers and he ends up giving them the magical statue he got from Shana so that they can find the entrance to town and go home. Latok finds the treehouse where Shana lives and she gives him a replacement statue. Here we also meet the voice of Shana's dead grandmother. Shana's grandma asks Latok to travel to the far side of the forest in order to rid them of the tyrannical King of the East. On the way there, Latok meets up with Rune, who you may remember as sort of Latok's rival from the first game. He is friendly this time and happy to see Latok. We also meet him once again later in the game where he mentions that he has a wife and daughter now. During this brief meeting, we also get to hear another rendition of the main Xak theme. The next short area is one of the first places where you can fall and die instantly. It's quite easy to fall to your death in these areas. Also, attacking with your sword in this game is not very easy in my opinion. The basic idea is that, like in Xak I, when you're not attacking, you're in defensive mode. So when the enemies attack, you want to be either not attacking or out of the way. Unfortunately, your sword doesn't have a long reach and you have to get pretty close to attack, so it can be near impossible to avoid hits while you have your sword out. I find the best bet is to swing your sword near an enemy and wait for it to come to you. But it seems no matter how confident I am attacking my enemies, it's really easy to die suddenly. It's like, oh, these guys seem pretty easy, I don't even need to save my game every time I kill one. Oh wait, whoops, no, I'm dead. Waiting for that game over screen to come up and then for my save file to load can feel excruciating. I mean, it's not really that long, but it sure feels like it when you die this much. Also, you can regain HP by standing in place like in the previous game, but it's really slow. So much of the footage I captured of this game is just me standing in place waiting to regain HP. Later in the game, when money became less of an issue, I ended up just using items most of the time to restore HP, rather than waiting around. One way to make the game a lot easier is with the new projectile attack added for Xak II. Like in the first game, when you buy new equipment, you have to go to the magic shop to have magic cast on all of it. But in this one, casting magic on your sword will unlock a projectile attack. Then you can turn the Kana key to the locked position and your regular attack is replaced with a projectile. You're not going to want to leave it enabled though, because the projectile attack rapidly depletes your MP meter. Throughout the earlier stages of the game, the projectile attack really feels like just a special treat that you're only able to use for a short amount of time before it runs out. Then the only way to get your MP back is to go to the church in town. And that's not even the only reason you'll be constantly returning to this church. Here you can also restore your karma to 0. What the hell is karma, you ask? Why, it's one of the very worst ideas implemented in Xak II. While attacking enemies, you may sometimes find that suddenly they don't seem to be giving any experience anymore. This means that you've killed too many enemies and your karma has maxed out at 130. Why 130? I don't know, just to make it more confusing, I guess. An even better question is, why implement this karma system at all? In a game where leveling up is one of the most important goals, it seems cruel to stop giving the player experience. My best guess is that they wanted to disincentivize picking on weak enemies for experience, so they made it so you can't just do that forever. Even with this penalty in place, killing weak enemies seems to be the best way to level up in this game, as long as you can keep traveling back to the church. Trying to take down harder enemies to gain more experience just results in constant game overs, I've found, making it actually take longer. The East games always seem to do fine by just making weak enemies hardly give you any experience. This karma thing seems like nothing but a way to waste the player's time by making them have to constantly return to town. Thus, you're going to always want at least one teleport magic in your inventory, since returning to the hub town is a constant necessity. Not only to restore your MP and karma at the church, but also to buy new equipment as you level up. As in the first game, equipment has a minimal required level before you can buy it. So between many trips to town and back, I gradually made my way through the cave dungeon in the forest, before eventually meeting the boss, the King of the East. The boss BGM in this game has such a loud attack at the beginning. It's pretty hardcore. I kinda love that sound. The boss has a pretty easy weakness to exploit behind his head. Latak obtains one of the royal jewels, which are the MacGuffins of the game. While dying, the king begs Latak to protect their sleeping princess, Mune, and not let her fall into the hands of the Demon King Gospel. Latak then finds a sleeping girl who looks exactly like Shauna. She won't wake up, so Latak carries her to Shauna's treehouse. There, Shauna's grandma tells the story of the forest people. 100 years ago, an evil wizard put a curse on the forest before being defeated by a great sage. Then 18 years ago, 2 girls were born, and the people of the forest were attacked soon after, leaving only the 2 girls and their grandmother to survive. One of the 2 girls, Mune, was kidnapped, and Shauna was left to be raised by her grandmother in the forest. For lack of any better options, Latak and Shauna decide to take the sleeping girl Mune to the hospital in town. But before that, Latak needs another magic statue because his last one broke when he defeated the boss. Good thing Shauna seems to just have a whole pile of these things laying around. Mune isn't waking up anytime soon. In the meantime, Latok has been asked by the mayor to also rid the nearby crystal mines of monsters, since they are an important source of income for the town. Before going there, let's pick up a life cape at the item shop. Just like in the first game, this item allows Latok to slowly regain his HP, even in areas where he normally can't do so. In the first game, switching this on and off was annoying due to the disk access time, but here it's much simpler. You just use the item once, it disappears from your inventory, and is permanently equipped for the rest of the game. The gauntlet and protection ring that increase your attack and defense respectively also work the same way. To travel to the crystal mines, you enter this small area to the left of town. If you try to go here before clearing the forest, a disembodied voice will tell Latok not to explore here yet, but you can just ignore it if you want. The enemies in the mine here are great for getting experience earlier in the game, and this area is much closer to town than the deeper parts of the forest area. Anyway, after you've cleared the forest and are actually supposed to be in the mines, it's a surprisingly short section of the game. There's a relatively small but confusing dungeon with multiple floors and invisible warps that send you to completely different places. You're told earlier that you just need to find the elevator key in the first sub-basement, but getting there is easier said than done. I ended up using a map I found online in order to figure this one out, because without one it's really hard to understand what's going on here. The invisible warps have two sides to them, and counterintuitively, each side takes you to a completely different place. It's a little easier in the PC Engine version, where the warps are visible. Once we finally find the key, we can simply take the elevator down to the bottom floor. There's a short platforming section here, but it isn't very difficult since there are no instant deaths. There are two bosses, but they shouldn't be too difficult if you are powered up enough. Latok defeats the Queen of the West and gets another one of the royal jewels.
This is the Wicked Witch of the West. She's worse than the other one was.
Back in town, Latok gets some bad news at the weapon shop of all places. Hey, you know your dad, dork? Yeah, you said you didn't know anything about him earlier. Well, actually I know him. You do? Yeah, he's dead. What? Yeah, he died, but you know, he died bravely and all that. Can you tell me anything else? Nah, you gonna buy anything, kid? Next, Latok travels to the castle atop the mountain, south of the town, in order to obtain the next jewel, but the castle can only be reached by magic. The wizard at the fountain south of town sends Latok on a journey through the sky in order to get there. This sequence is pretty cool, but it's unskippable and you have to watch it every time you travel between the castle and town. This is the longest dungeon, but probably also my favorite part of the game. Why? Because at this point you can buy a cross and magic cross, items which restore your karma and MP respectively. These finally eliminate the need to constantly return to the church, and you can fully concentrate on exploring the dungeon while leveling up. Some highlights of the dungeon include an item which allows Latok to shrink and explore the cracks in the walls while fighting off rats, and a diving suit which allows Latok to explore the flooded basement of the fortress. Some lowlights are these platforming areas where falling means instant death. This wouldn't really be a problem if the Xak VR System 2.0 made it a little easier to tell where Latok actually is in relation to the platforms. It's really easy to overshoot them or even stupidly just walk right over the edge. Each successful jump is a victory, so I recommend saving your game after every single one. Luckily, saving only takes a second. Other than that, the castle dungeon is going swimmingly, until right near the very end when Latok suddenly maxes out at level 50. This actually really ruins the rhythm of the game for me. Gaining experience is such an integral part of the journey in games like this. It really feels like something is missing once leveling is no longer a thing. But anyway, the dungeon is nearly over by this point. We just need to fight the King of the South up in the sky, and get the next jewel. While Latok was away at the castle, Shauna was kidnapped from the town by a man in a black cape and taken to Death Mountain. So next, Latok prepares to board a ship to take him there. The port is on the screen just north of town. As Latok is boarding the ship, another old friend from the first game arrives. It's Frey, and she's been training and is really strong now. In fact, she's just been through an entire game of her own. Surely Latok will allow Frey to join him. No. But? Too dangerous? No. But Frey stows away on the ship using teleport magic. Latok makes sure to point out that she could have accidentally teleported herself into a wall or something. I love when works of fiction take time to address the very real dangers of teleportation. Then the ship gets attacked. I don't really like this part, fighting monsters on the ship. You can go back to the inside part to recover your HP and MP, but it's still very easy to get suddenly killed. After finding and talking to everyone on deck once, you then have to keep going back to the wizard guy at the helm, who tells you which character is looking tired and needs to be taken out of battle next. You then go to them one by one, and Frey teleports them out of battle. Then you meet the man in the black cape at the bow of the ship. He introduces himself as the King of the North, Rob Necromancer. That sounds like the name of the vocalist from some kind of emo or black metal band or something. Anyway, he reveals that Shauna and Mune are the keys to unlocking Gospel's full power. He kidnaps Mune from the ship and sends her to Gospel in order to complete his collection, and then attacks Latok. This was a pretty tough boss, but actually a fun challenge once I learned the pattern. Rob Necromancer is destroyed, but not before he can whip up a vicious sea storm. Latok takes another page from Adol when he gets shipwrecked and seems to be the lone survivor, aside from the pixie, of course. She's so evil. She's always there. So anyway, this island is the way to Death Mountain, so Latok continues on. There's a fun little maze with no enemies where you place the royal jewels in statues in order to open warps. Hidden at the end of this dungeon is the Xak sword. No way! The best sword is named after the game? It turns out the sword can also turn into a dragon, so now we get to play whatever ungodly mess this is supposed to be. There was a shooter stage in the first game, but this time they thought it would be cool to try to add a bunch of parallax scrolling, bringing the frame rate down to like 5 frames per second. I would be okay with this if it was just kind of a short tech demo and mostly for show, but this stage is actually really hard. The hitbox of your dragon is quite large, and some of these shot patterns seem to be nearly impossible to weave through. The stage is pretty long, but luckily it isn't too difficult to get to the end. Latok flies into a cave and it looks like everything's finished, but then you hear the most dreaded sound known to man. So there's a really hard boss at the end of the stage, and every time you fail you have to play through this whole long mess of bumpy parallax scrolling again. The strategy for the boss is ambiguous. There are these almost unavoidable walls of lightning that close in from both sides. I ended up looking for hints online in order to figure this one out. It turns out that the boss wants you to stay close in, and when you get too far away from him, he punishes you by sending the walls of lightning. You want to stay in this area over his talons, but at least in the PC-88 version, he sends out one unpreventable round of lightning right away at the beginning, and sometimes sends a few more for some reason, even if you don't get very far away. The only strategy is to arrive at the boss with as much HP remaining as possible, and do your best to dodge his fireballs, hoping not too many surprise lightning attacks appear. I managed eventually, but I despised this part of the game. It took way too many tries. Now all that's left is the final battle with Gospel. Let's put a spoiler warning here for people who want to play through the game themselves. The Pixie is rendered unconscious due to Gospel's power and stays behind. Good, I don't trust her. Gospel is all wired up H.R. Geiger style as depicted on the cover of the game.
What can you do stuck to a wall?
But he uses Mune to fully revive himself. The battle plays a little differently from the rest of the game. Latok is always facing forward as you move him around. The two phases are actually not very difficult if you know the strategy. You have to remember that whenever you're not attacking, you're in defensive mode, and try not to get hit while shooting. After Gospel is defeated, Mune is returned, and she awakens for the first time in the game. She has no idea where she is or who Latok is. It's actually kind of awkward. Then outside, we find that the Pixie has suddenly grown into human form due to the sudden release of the power of Xak, or whatever.
Oh, dear me, I did it.
Tink, look what happened. You broke your house. You're humongous.
We learn that everyone who is in the shipwreck is okay, and they all fly back to the town of Banua on their magical ship. Oh yeah, apparently the ship can fly now, thanks to a magical stone. Then we're taken to a scene back at Latok's house, where we get the harem ending. Frey and the Pixie are fighting over Latok, only to be informed by Latok's mom that he just went out to the forest along with this minor character from the first game. Latok takes another page from Adol and declares that rather than staying in his hometown, he's ready to go off on another journey. He is certain that somewhere in this world of Xak, there are more people who need his help. And I wouldn't doubt it. Finally, during the credits sequence, we get a number of illustrations showing how the people of Banua are getting along. Xak II is a game that I really want to love. It has that particular graphic and music style of Japanese PC games from the late 80s and early 90s that I tend to gravitate to. There are parts that I genuinely enjoyed, but also parts that I really hated. And unfortunately, like the first game, there are aspects of the game that seem like they were made just to waste the player's time. While it does fix some of the issues from Xak I, Xak II just adds new issues to deal with. Overall, if I had to choose between the two, I think I prefer Xak I, with its bump attack system and journey around the world, which feels more epic than the Hubtown-based adventure of Xak II. But now, let's talk about the ports. The PC-88 version was released just over a month after the PC-88 version. Just like Xak I, the audio and graphics are virtually the same, aside from the sharper text. The scrolling and disk access is considerably smoother though. You also get 3 game saves per user disk instead of 1, and several more fast and stable speed settings to make the adventure go faster. Another month later, and the MSX II version was released. As usual, the MSX II tries really hard to keep up, but with the VR System 2.0, it mostly chokes. On an original MSX II like this one, the speed really suffers, even with the no wait mode turned on. The speed issues remind me a lot of Ys 3 for MSX II. Xak II, however, will run faster on an MSX Turbo R. Thankfully, the FM pack music sounds really great again in this one, but I hate how the music tends to cut out during disk access time in some of these FM pack games. If you're looking to play the game with an English patch, then this version is currently your only option. While there was no version of Xak I for the FM towns, it did get a version of Xak II released half a year after the MSX version. The graphics appear to be taken directly from the PC-98 version rather than really taking advantage of the FM towns' graphical capabilities. But the scrolling and access time make this probably the smoothest version yet. Since this one is on a CD-ROM, there's a decent enough CD remix of the soundtrack here. The game generally doesn't have voices, but they did add a bit of narration for the opening, performed by a very famous voice actor.
バドゥの野望は費やさったのである.
The X68000 version is a bit of an odd case. It was originally supposed to get a full retail release, but was cancelled. Later in 1992, they decided to release it, but only for Takeru disc writer kiosks, so there's no official packaging for this one. Like the FM Towns version, the game itself appears to just use the graphics from the PC-98 version, which is a bit of a letdown considering the nice redrawn graphics that Xak I for X68000 had. Still, this version of Xak II runs quite smoothly and has a nice stereo FM rendition of the soundtrack. The only console release was for the PC Engine, as part of the Xak 1 and 2 compilation. On this one, both Xak 1 and 2 have sort of a hybrid game system from the two games, featuring the jump from Xak 2 but also the bump attack from Xak 1. I have to say, I enjoy having the bump attacks back after playing through the PC-88 version. There's also no stupid karma system in this one, which is awesome. The first major issue though is that they tried to cram in music from both games, and there was hardly any room for Xak 2's soundtrack. You'll be listening to reused Xak 1 music throughout the majority of the Xak 2 portion. They could have at least included PSG chip tunes for the shops and houses, but instead they have PSG tunes reused from Xak 1. PSG hardly uses any disk space, so this is just lazy. Ys 1 and 2 for PC Engine at least had all the shop and town music from Ys 2. Even the music used for the hub town in this version is from this town in Xak 1, rather than having a remix of the actual Banua town music. But wait a minute, if you go to this area west of town, here's the town music. And a rather nice CD rendition of it too, I'd say. What a waste, using it for this short area of the game, rather than the town where it belongs. Seriously, this has got to be a mistake. And it wouldn't surprise me considering how buggy and unfinished this game feels. The nearly instant boss kills make you feel like you're playing with a cheat code, and just like the Xak 1 portion of this version, the shooter stage is broken. To be more specific, you can't move your dragon up or down, unless of course you get hit by an enemy who knocks you up or down. I have serious doubts that this was done intentionally. Still, they didn't try to do any bumpy parallax, and it's over quite quickly, so I would rather play this than the shooter stage in the PC-88 version. Even with all those negatives, this version overall is extremely fast and easy, while still somehow feeling surprisingly satisfying to play, most of the time. The game is broken, but at least it's a playable kind of broken. If you don't mind the language barrier, this makes for a great weekend playthrough. One thing I failed to mention in my Xak I video are the Xak games for Japanese flip phones released in the mid-2000s. New versions of Xak I, II, and the Tower of Gazelle were completely reprogrammed and redrawn. Since I still have an old phone that could almost definitely play these games, it's kind of a shame they aren't available to download anywhere. Still, given my memories of playing games on this phone, I doubt I would have enjoyed these versions very much. Xak II is another interesting entry in what I would argue is a quintessential series of action RPGs on the PC-88. But going back to my original question, is Xak II still an Ys clone? The removal of the bump attack system alone may be enough to convince some players that this is no longer a blatant copy of Ys. And of course, Xak II also has a number of unique ideas of its own, questionable as some of them may be. Still, I would argue that much of the inspiration from the Ys series is still apparent in the dungeons, game system, and the game's progression style. So while I say Xak I was an Ys clone, maybe for Xak II I will tone it down a notch and call it an Ys-inspired action RPG instead. Whatever it is, Xak II can be a pretty decent game overall, especially if you choose to play one of the two later PC releases, or possibly the delightfully broken PC Engine version. If Xak II, Rising of the Redmoon looks like something you'd enjoy, then why not give it a try for yourself? Thanks for watching this episode of PC-88 Paradise. I was so glad I was finally able to cover this game. There's still many more games I want to hit for both PC-88 and 98, so I hope you'll stick around. Please subscribe to Basement Brothers if you haven't already, and let your friends know about the channel if they're into classic games. This has been your host, Mr. Jakes. See you next time.